Hi everyone, I want to take you on another time traveling journey today, and we're going to use this rock as our time traveling device. You'll notice that it's filled with snail fossils. And this rock is probably about 400-ish million years old, from a period that geologists call the Devonian period. So geologists, in order to understand time, have to break it up into periods so that they can talk about it fluently and be able to refer to the same place at the same time. Because on planet Earth, what will happen is rocks of a certain age will get exposed in different areas. So a lot of the names, geological names for the rocks in this kind of era, you notice the word Devonian. That's because they were named for rocks in Devon in England. So they saw rocks of this age in Devon, England. They called them Devonian. And then when you see those rocks again somewhere else in the world of that age, they're Devonian rocks. It's the name that's assigned from the first example that was found. But what's really cool about the Saugeen Territory is that you can range through, you sort of travel through time as you go from the east to the west. So if we were in the west where Collingwood Craigleith is, you're looking at rocks that are about 440 to 450 million years old, and they're Ordovician in age. So that's what the geologists call that age of rock. As you go into the center of the territory, into the Saugeen Peninsula, you're talking about rocks that are Silurian in age, and so they're about 420 million years old. And then as you go further south, sort of south of Southampton and reaches below that, you see rocks that are Devonian in age, which is about 400 to 420 million years. So it's just this literal rainbow of time that you can travel through from east to west, and you can see fossils of the coral reefs that were in each one of those time periods, which is really amazing. But what was extra amazing was that beside this fossil on the beach was a snail shell. And look how remarkably similar those two animals are, even though they are divided by 400 million years of time. That is something that tells you that the body plan of a snail is a fairly stable evolutionary idea because it hasn't changed much in 400 million years, which is kind of amazing. And what's neat more is this particular species is a brown mystery snail. And it has a quality about it that kind of connects it to its oceanic ancestors in a way. It's got a little door that it covers this hole with. So when the snail goes back inside the shell, and this is an aquatic snail, so this would have been living in a river or an inland lake and then probably washed out to Greater Lake Huron. It's got a little door that goes over top of this when it goes inside of its shell. And that little door is called an operculum. It's the same kind of name for the flap on the gill of a fish. That's also called an operculum. So this little door that the snail uses to close up kind of protects it from probably drying out and maybe even predators. And ocean snails have the same thing. They'll have a little door often, not all of them, but many of them, in order to protect them from predation or from drying out during tides. Now, because this snail has this little door, it's safe to say that it evolved from a lineage of snails that went from living in the ocean to living in fresh water. But some of the aquatic snails in our area actually evolved from a lineage that went from the ocean, that evolved to live on land, that then later evolved to live in freshwater, because some of those snails actually have lungs instead of just gills. In some cases they have lungs and gills, but it's kind of an interesting thing to think about how these different snails evolved and how similar, because of this operculum, this one is to its ancient snail ancestors. Which is pretty neat to think about. And you'll notice that I've got a rounded kind of body here, and then you've got this kind of flat cut section. So what we're looking at is actually a cross section of the snail. That's what scientists would call it, a cross section. It's been cut, and that's sort of what we're seeing in that particular fossil is the inside of the shell, because it's been the shell has actually been worn down to the point that we can see inside of it, just like this sliced one. Another cool thing about this particular species is that scientists are finding that a lot of the northern populations are sometimes without any males. So some species are capable of, the females will actually be able to just make young or eggs without any kind of male help. That's because the female state is sort of the natural condition in the wildlife. That's why men have nipples, basically, because everyone starts out in a female state and then they either become male or they stay female. But in the case of these snails, there's a good chance that a lot of them are mostly female, and they can actually sort of make young without males being around. And what's really sweet about this particular species is it gives birth to live snails. So it doesn't lay eggs. The snails come out with little tiny baby shells, and they actually stay in the uterus of the snail mother until those little shells are what they call at the two-whorl stage. So they have two of these whorls. And there's actually a special little area in the snail uterus that these baby snails can graze, that they can sort of eat nutrients in the way that snails do. And the way snails eat nutrients is they've got a tongue that's basically like a rasp, and they can actually scrape away at the surface of rock and get algae and stuff. So I don't know what that little pouch inside the uterus looks like, but it must have some quality about it that kind of mimics what these snails would eat when they grow up. So this snail is a really good mother who keeps her snail babies safe in her uterus until they're actually quite big, and then releases them into the world. But it's amazing to think about these two snails next to each other, because this snail makes its shell out of calcium carbonate. Calcium carbonate is essentially kind of a chalk, just like you imagine what you'd write on a chalkboard with, and you can see how chalky and white this is. So that calcium carbonate that this particular snail made its shell out of would have come from the bedrock, because over time the bedrock gets dissolved and some of that calcium comes out and dissolves into the water, and the snail can absorb that calcium in a nutrient type way and use it to make a shell. And that calcium carbonate that the bedrock is made up of is in turn made up of millions of years of dead snail shells and coral and clam shells and crinoid shells that have compacted together over time. So this individual brown mystery snail is literally made of the bones of its ancestors, which you can see in the rocks right beside it.